Okay, so in the last part we created these two bass sounds here, one using stock Ableton stuff and one using lots of plugins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze both of these and we're going to have a look at the audio files that we get out of those. And in this tutorial I'm going to be going through interesting ways in which you can use sampled audio like this and continue kind of the processes that we started with these basses to get something even better. So first a little bit of background about this kind of technique. Why even resample in the current year? Because we have very, very powerful computers compared to when really resampling first became a technique that was used on basses. We can have a processing chain that looks like this, and it doesn't really even touch the sides of the computer. It is able to just do that in real time just fine. So why stop? Because a lot of the kinds of sounds that people were producing when people first started using resampling was really they could fit about, 2 or 3 effects on there before the computer was starting to sweat and they needed to record stuff out, and then they would apply effects to that sampled audio so they could repeat the process. We don't really have the processing power needs to do that anymore because computers are able to handle such complicated processing chains. So why bother? So for me, I think the reason I tend to do this is that there's actually, as with a lot of things that you're forced to do by hardware reasons, hardware constraints, there's actually a sound to them that's developed over time that is hard to recreate any other way. So just like how, sort of vinyl noise and cracks, pops, that kind of thing become part of that medium that people are nostalgic for, and like MP3 artifacts and that kind of thing probably has the same like resonance for me. The sorts of things that you had to do with hardware when you really were forced to do it by the hardware become a sound that you actually like, that becomes something that you want to aim for. So that's kind of the reason why I still tend to do this resampling thing when you could just have a crazy serum patch that sounds great right out of the box. And that's because really I think there's a sound that you get from just repeating this sort of process of adding effects, sampling the audio, playing with the sampled audio, that really is possibly achievable using other methods, but just never quite sounds the way it does when you do it this way, I think. So, enough rambling. I will take the sampled audio from bass 2 here, and we can have a little look through the audio file that I've got here in this is an instance of Simpler in Ableton rather than Sampler. So we certainly got some good stuff in there, but the most important thing, I think firstly I'm going to change it to a sampler, and I'm going to set the root notes down to be F, because I recorded out an F note from here, and otherwise it won't match up to the key that I'm playing nicely. Now where I find resampling really comes into its own is looping bits of audio, and this can be a way that you can kind of achieve a bit of the same kind of movement that you would get from something like detuning to oscillators, because really what's happening when you detune to oscillators is they're cycling between the two notes that they're playing. They're cycling in phase, so you get a repetitive motion, and that is really just what you get by looping a bit of audio as well. It's obviously not actually the same thing, but the same result. And I think this is where, for me, the kind of classic resound sits, is in that that repeated motion of looped audio. So I've just set I've set up the sampler to have glide set on and only one voice. So again, we've got kind of a monophonic resound. Gonna bring up the volume a bit. Now let's just have a look through the audio file, and it's easy to do that because I can just take this bit that I'm sampling here and move it through while playing the note. And people that recognize things like that will know that that kind of is granular synthesis, that moving of a buffer through audio. So let's settle on that bit because that sounded cool. I'm going to set a crossfade here. So what that's going to do is, rather than just looping completely hard, it just goes from the end to the start again, which is something that can sound cool, but it's going to crossfade, so the next buffer of audio will start playing before the last one is finished. Now you might even just sort of recognize that's what a lot of basses sound like, that kind of looped audio effect. I put a bit of a pitch attack at the start, so it sort of stabs. What's happening is that the pitch of the oscillator is coming down very quickly, in the same way as you might do when generating something like a snare from a synth. Just gives it a bit of attack. Now what this gives us is a lot of different options which we didn't have in our synth. So I'm going to start with just a note which I'm going to play here. Right, so first of all we have the frequency modulator oscillator inside sampler. So I'm just going to set that to be full attacks, full sustain, so it's just going to play a single note all the way through. There's not going to be any movement. Type sine and coarse pitch is going to match the oscillator, so it shouldn't sound sort of out of tune or weird. Now we've already got some really cool movement out of that. So again, the aim here is to create some interesting movement in the sound, and then to freeze that, get some audio out, and then repeat the process. Now what's interesting is that the looping kind of implies a rhythm, so it's going 1, 2, 3, 4. But the automation that you apply, like the LFO, doesn't really have to sync up with that at all. And in fact, the less well it syncs up, the more variation you're going to get between the looping of the sound and the effects that you apply to it. I'm going to do the same thing for a filter here. In fact, what I think would be really cool to do is set up my multi-band effects again here. So I've got a top, I've got a low, and a mid. So that's low, mid, top. I'll get rid of my filter for now. I'm noticing that's starting to clip a bit, so I'm going to just stick a saturator at the end. That's funny. I'm noticing it's clipping in the wrong place, so I'll clip it in the right place, as if it matters. Yeah. At least I'll have more control that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my weird filter rack that I had before, and I'm going to do just an LFO like this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to random, and I'm going to set smoothing all the way on. So what's happening now is it's sort of randomly going between different modular terms, different positions, and then it's also it's sort of smoothing that out, so we get this like shark fin shaped curve. And I'm going to apply that to the filter frequency. I'm going to apply it to the resonance. So we get this just crazy kind of dance that's going on here. And I'm going to make this into a morph filter. So I'm going to apply the last one to the morph. So we've got all this great movement going on. I'm going to set it to be fairly high up, so it's actually in the frequency range that the split is applied to. And I'm just going to take that, duplicate it, apply it all over for the mid, and then, oh, that's still high. So the mid is now going to have that applied all over, and then the same for the low end. The low end it's kind of a crazy thing to do, to have all of this filtering going on low end. It's going to mess with the phase, but it's going to sound cool. So we got some really interesting movement going on here. Just going to set morph all the way up for each of these. Now, as a part of that, I'm going to also create a dry chain as well, and I'm going to stick something like, probably OTT will do the job. It's a bit crude, but that's going to force everything back to being filling out the spectrum fairly evenly. And I'm going to put a little bit of my dry chain through, just because that filtering is filtering out a lot, so we're losing a lot of the sound. Right, so that's sounding cool. Let's try the that FM oscillator going up even higher. Try it higher up. Try the FM oscillator being lower down in pitch. Right, let's put a little bit more stereo on this. So I'm going to do something, again, this is fairly crude. I'm just going to put a chorus on the whole thing. And I'm then going to high pass that a little bit. So I'm going to set this to be mid side, and I'm going to high pass the side signal only, so we don't get too much width in the lows. Now, putting just a classic chorus effect on a whole bass is a little bit, I guess it used to be kind of controversial, because it's like, oh, will it mess up your low end, that kind of thing. But when I've got something like this on the low end later down the chain, it doesn't really matter. That's going to make the low end crazy and weird and messed up in a kind of beautiful way, and putting something like this on before it that adds some sort of phasey wobbly detuning is just not going to matter. We can always put stuff back and fix it in post. So just going to have how the frequency spectrum's looking now. So it's sounding cool. Something else that I think would be quite nice to do now is to explore different bits of the original audio file now that we've got this chain set up. So I took a copy of the channel just so that I've got that original one to go back to if I need to. Now let's just have a look around. There's plenty of cool stuff in here. That's a good bit there. Now, this is starting to sound a little bit kind of thin, and that's not really a bad thing yet, because there's loads of ways to fix that. I'm going to put a multiband dynamics on just to sort of bring up the mids. I could do this with Ableton's multiband dynamics. I'm just going to stick to Pro MB because it's a little bit faster. And we could do something like, at this point, if I take that channel and I duplicate, or I create another channel and I put operator on it, bring that all the way down so we've got a sub from it. Now I'm going to make a kind of noise channel, like a top end noise for it. And there are so many different ways you can do this. One way is like distorting a sine wave with some noise on top. I think erosion works similar to that, so I'm just going to use erosion for this. That sounded good, and I'm going to set the coarse tuning down to be half the lowest frequency, the frequency of the sub. So that's what we end up with. Just going to high pass that. And what could be quite nice is if I put a bit of distortion after the erosion, but before the high pass filter, I'm going to be distorting, going to be really like smashing that sine wave into the erosion, into the noise, so we end up with this really like jumpy, fluttery sounding noise. And like everything that I've done so far, I'm going to put an LFO on that drive. Now that's a really quite dangerous thing to do because that drive is going up really loud. I don't want to hurt my ears, so careful when you're doing things like that. That's sounding good. And then the last thing that I want on here is another LFO that I'm actually just going to map to the entire volume of the channel. So that comes in occasionally. And through that we've got this like nice noise layer that sort of comes in and out. It might be a bit more obvious if I low pass the original sound here. That's cool. Let's have a bit more like stereo width on this. I'm going to add some spread to it. That's certainly very wide now. So I'm going to put on another one of these mid-side EQs. So just bringing down that side signal a bit. Last thing that I want to do is, I think we're losing the mid quite often. I don't mind the top end because the top end I want to come in and out, but the mid's really where most of the sound, most of the audible sound is in the mids. So I'm just going to compress that quite a lot. Just some last little adjustments in this Pro MB. Right, that's sounding cool. So what's great about this process is that that's not it. You can just freeze that once you've got something interesting out of it, and you've got another audio file, another bit of bass here that you can then try completely different things with, or you can try sort of similar processes. What I like to do is just chuck that into a simpler, again, I'm doing that just by dropping this onto a new channel and it will automatically create me a simpler. And I can just sort of scroll through the audio file and get a feel for what we've ended up with. Oh, there's a good bit there. I'm going to put a loop on that. Just I'm doing this with simpler instead of sampler now. Going to make that into a monophonic one. Now what's really nice in Simpler is that you can actually automate the start position here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a kind of inspiration bass machine, and I'm going to use my favorite, which is expression control. I'm just going to put that at the start of the chain. Set these to all be random, and the idea here is that what my instrument that I'm playing here will do is it will sort of provide me like a suggestion of a bass that I could use. So I'm going to map this to the start and the loop length. And that way, every time I press a note, I get a different bass out of it. Gonna change that to just doing the loop length. Yeah, what I really want is I want to change the start position and the length rather than the loop. I can bring that right down so it's a bit shorter. Just getting rid of that click by adding a fade. So that's really cool. What I can do is I can put a couple of notes in, so it will just suggest me a bass every time I hit a note. Just making the sample length the loop length not quite go down as far as that. Perhaps a little bit further like that. There's other interesting things that I could try automating with the expression control. For example, there is also a pitch envelope, which I can get to here. Oh, hang on, that's a filter envelope. Something about looking at this while it's zoomed in, it's really making it hard for me to find stuff. Pitch, there it is. So what I can do is I can change how much that pitch envelope will affect the sound, and I can change all sorts of stuff like the attack, sustain, release. Let's do that again using another one just to affect the release and perhaps transpose as well. Those like sort of backspin effects you get from it pitching up very high and then pitching down. It's quite funny. What I love is that you can hear there's like this kind of like squelchiness to the top end, and that actually comes all the way from back here when we were working on the bass right at the start. It was these are set of EQ8s right at the very beginning of the whole process, and that's like kind of bled through at every stage through all of these different effects right through into this, which I just think is really, really cool. Now we can do other stuff, like we can just take the whole processing chain that we put on this before and we can stick that onto my bass generator here and see what we end up with. Might want to refreeze these two channels just so that I don't start running out of processing power. There we go. Yeah, that's cool. At every single note on, we're getting a different chop of the bass, combined with all of this crazy filtering stuff that's going on. Now, it's got to be the two things you got to be aware of is that when you're using randomization on the pitch like this is probably not going to be very tonal anymore. And you'll have to sort of find the pitch of the individual bit of audio that you're working with to tune it to whatever key your track is in. And the other thing is that you should always be recording when you're using this much randomization, because there will just be an awesome bit of sound that it will spit out, and you'll never hear it again. That's the funny thing is it's a bit like when you shuffle a deck of cards. It's overwhelmingly likely that the pack that you're holding is unique in the entire universe, because 52 combinations of cards is so unlikely to be replicated ever. And when you think about these aren't just cards, these are continuous controls, and all of them are automated. Like, you'll never kind of get the same thing out of this process ever. So yeah, if you hear something awesome, you've just got to hope that the controls will produce it again. So, while we're sort of witness to this audio that is completely unrecreatable, I'm going to freeze this so that we've got a bit of it that we can keep. So, oh, I accidentally duplicated that, I think. That's going to make it complain. Let's try that. Right, I've got a new channel here and I can just put that in there. We've got some really fun bits out of that. Now what I love is that this is just a sampler and this is just a sample. So I can stick that straight back into there and we'll get exactly the same thing applied to that audio. So I can just do that again. Might turn down the chorus because when you think about it, repeatedly applying the chorus will just have that same chorusing effect more and more and more. So just going to turn that down. We'll freeze this again. There we go. We've got a second pass through that whole chain. We got some just like fascinating stuff out of that. I'm going to put a simpler on here so that we can just explore what we've got. We've got some amazing stuff just for one clip of audio. Just going to do a little bit of light, maybe OTT on it, just so that we don't completely lose bits of the spectrum, and I'm going to boost it up with the saturator. We got some interesting bits. We got like a low end bit at the start, a sort of faller, this like backspin effect, and then some crazy telephone call antics happening there. So again, we can loop bits of this. Let's set that length all the way down. This is probably what people would now describe as a neuro bass, I guess. I've never really ended up using that term particularly. I normally just think of them all as basses, but that's probably a good thing to call it to sort of differentiate it, because like that and this are not the same sound and are not going to be like used in the same context. They're going to be very different. But I like that bit. That bit's definitely going in the sample pack. So yeah, I think I'll probably cut this here because we've gone through what, three resampling sessions there, and you can, I'm sure you can imagine like what the next step is I've got this sound which I like. I've taken all of this audio and I've gone all the way down through it to find sort of a couple of milliseconds that are my favorite bit. And then what you can do is you can then, once you've sort of farmed down to a little bit, you can then expand back out by adding more processing, going through the same process again on just that, and see where you end up. So yeah, I think that's really the core of doing things like resampling, is that you're kind of generating a lot of stuff, finding bits of it you like, then generating lots of stuff from that, and ending up somewhere completely different to where you started. So I hope that's given you lots of ideas. I've tried to keep this mainly Ableton focused, but I'm sure that there's ways in which you could recreate this in pretty much any DAW. If your DAW doesn't have any kind of multi-banding capability, everything that I've showed here you can do using multipass, like this, from Kilohertz, and you will end up with a slightly different sound because you're using different effects in here, but they're pretty similar, so you'll definitely end up with something along the same lines. So I would say this kind of technique is doable in any bit of modern audio editing software. So yeah, I'm really keen to see where people go with this, because I think it's pretty individual, and you always end up with interesting stuff from it. So yeah, thank you for watching.